great lineup of panelists here tonight. We have one who's running a little bit late, but she'll be here in just about 10 or 15 minutes, so we're going to go ahead and get started without her. First, I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about Denim Day. Can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Denim Day, what it is, why we honor it every year. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the history of Denim Day. In 1992, an 18-year-old girl in Italy was picked up by her driving instructor to begin a driving lesson. Soon after, she was raped on the side of the road by the instructor. She pressed charges and won her case. The instructor appealed, and the case went to the Italian High Court. In 1999, the court overturned the conviction with a member of the High Court declaring that since the victim wore very tight jeans, the instructor could not have removed them himself, therefore the victim must have willingly participated. Women of the Italian legislature protested the decision by wearing jeans to work, and other Italian women staged a protest by wearing jeans on the steps of the Supreme Court. As the news of the decision spread, so did the protest. In April 1999, a social service agency in Los Angeles established the first Denim Day in the United States. Wearing jeans on this day has become an international symbol of protest against erroneous and destructive attitudes about sexual assault. So that's why we always honor Denim Day every year, excuse me. So hopefully, thank you guys who are wearing denim today. We also have some little denim patches back in the back that you can decorate with slogans. If you want to grab one and show your support for Denim Day, put it on your backpack or whatever. Moving right along, we're going to start, I'm going to go ahead and just let you guys introduce yourselves. Is that all right? And then we will let you guys ask any question you would like. We have some volunteers here in the back from our student organization who have question sheets. Then if you just raise your hand, they'll hand you one and give you a pen. You can write down a question, and then they'll bring it up here to me so nobody will know who's been asking the questions. We also have some that have already been submitted by email, so those are the ones we're going to start out with. So any time at all while we get started, just raise your hand. They'll hand you a sheet. You fold it up, and then hand it to me. Okay, any question at all? There are no stupid answers, or no stupid questions.
There might be some stupid answers.
If you guys do a good job. No, there's no stupid questions, so please be sure to ask anything that comes to your mind, all right? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm Stephanie Jordan, the program coordinator for Project Rev. If you don't know what Project Rev is, we offer advocacy and counseling and resources here on TWU's campus to victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But that's who I am, and I'm just answering the questions. These are our experts who will be answering them. Go ahead.
I'm Paula Fernara, and I'm a registered nurse, and I'm a sexual assault nurse examiner. And we have a team in Denton County and all of the outlying counties, it seems like. Anyone who comes to one of the hospitals that we work out of will be glad to take care of the patient. We do a medical forensic exam with collection of evidence if that's necessary.
I'm Nicole Holmes. I'm the Director of Victim Outreach Services at Denton County Friends of the Family. So I'm over our counseling services that we provide free of charge to victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
I'm Ryan Calvert. I'm a felony prosecutor at the Denton County DA's office.
Lynn Carter. I'm the Detective Bureau Commander with the Denton Police Department.
Thank you guys for being here. Can we give a quick round of applause for our panelists? Thank you for being here. And if you guys can't hear at any point, because I know it gets kind of loud up here sometimes, just wave around and we will try to get louder. Okay, so let's start with a simple question. What is sexual assault?
I guess I'll take that one. Sexual assault is incredibly broadly defined in Texas. Basically, if you hear a factual situation and you think it might be a sexual assault, it probably is. Sexual assault legally means if there's any type of sexual penetration of the sexual organ, of the anus, or of the mouth by the sexual organ of another person, either without consent or if there's an age discrepancy. If the younger person is under the age of 17, that's the magic number in Texas is 17, and the other person is more than 3 years older, even if it's consensual. If there's more than a 3-year age gap and one of them's under 17, or regardless of age, if it's without consent, if there's any type of sexual penetration at all, that's going to be defined as sexual assault.
And I would just add to that it's not just an assault with the sexual organ.
Right.
It can be any penetration, anything past
Right.
the labia minora, or labia majora rather, with anything.
Yep. Anything, objects, anything at all. So.
Thank you. So what is the difference between rape and sexual assault?
Well, in Texas, we don't have legally we don't have that word rape. There's no such thing as rape. There is sexual assault. For example, what you would traditionally call a rape, that is a forcible, forcible sexual intercourse without consent of the victim, is legally the same crime as a 19-year-old having consensual sex with a 15-year-old. Now, in terms of punishment, how we treat those cases is vastly different. But in terms of the crime, they're the same. So we don't have that word rape in Texas law.
Next up. Don't most date rapes happen when the girl changes her mind and the guy gets carried away?
No. No. In fact, most sexual assaults, actually, the research has suggested, are pre-planned. That most of the time, when they've questioned offenders afterward, they've said they went out that night with the intention of having sex. So her behavior, whether she started out consensual and changed her mind, is irrelevant if he planned ahead of time to have sex. Besides that, that any party has the right to change their mind at any point. And so that you get to decide how far sexual activity goes and at what point it stops.
I would just say that the inability to give consent is also no consent.
Yep.
So alcohol, drugs, anything, whether they ingested them because they wanted to, they did it themselves, or because it was given to them for, as a date rape drug, if they, if they chose inappropriate clothes and ran down the street naked, I don't care. It is still sexual assault. It's not consensual with permission.
What we're finding, or what I found that comes across my desk when it comes to date rape, is mostly cases with both parties, the man and the woman, have been drinking. There was some sort of sexual encounter that took place. Generally, there's going to be a disagreement. He says it was consensual. She says at some point it wasn't consensual. We haven't found a lot where the victim says that, yeah, he, attacked me, or it was one of those stranger cases. Generally, alcohol or drugs involved, and one party either couldn't consent to the sex or consented, but at some point didn't want to continue the act, and the other party continued. So we deal with a lot of those when it comes to date rape. It's not a whole bunch of physical force onto the victim.
And keep in mind that force or coercion can mean many different things. And so at the point that someone says no is when it's supposed to stop. And so a victim doesn't have to fight physically for it to be force. And at least from a therapist point of view, from my point of view, force can be using body size, intimidating, guilting, pressuring. All of those things are ways that somebody can be coerced into sex.
And that's where I think
that's where the therapist is.
There's a world of difference though between the therapeutic side of things and the legal side of things, because while it's true that legally speaking they're not required to fight back necessarily, like I'll take the example you just gave. If they start, like Lynn said, they start messing around, they start having a sexual encounter. She says no, and he says words to her that make her feel guilty, and she goes, well, okay. Legally speaking, that is not a sexual assault. That is maybe a bad sexual choice on her part, or bad behavior on his part, but that is, right, Lynn, do you agree with that? That's just not a crime. Right. That's not something we can prosecute. And so while legally speaking on the law side of things, we don't need her to physically fight necessarily. Of course, if she does, that's always a good indicator that there's no consent there, and that's certainly good evidence. But like Captain Carter said, forcible rape, violent attacks, of a sexual nature are really pretty rare. We do have to be able to prove the police have to be able to show us as prosecutors, and we have to show a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that she, honest to God, was saying no actively and did not in any way consent. And that can be a big challenge, especially on those date rape cases where there's drugs and alcohol involved. That can be a really hard thing to do. So.
Well, when we do a sexual assault exam, we do our medical forensic exam, and the reason I keep saying that is we are the medical person, and so everything we're doing is to make sure that they are medically cared for, that we know if there are injuries and we care for injuries, not just sexual injuries, but say strangulation or being held, bruising, broken arms. So everything we do is medically oriented. But when we write our history, we write a history in their words as they tell us, but we're only listening and putting the parts of their history that refer to body part to body part or possible injury, because that's where we're going to go and look. But it is in their words, and if they tell us of having fought them off or something, then we definitely are looking there. If they tell us any injury that may be there, we look at the whole body. But the other part of that was, just wanted to point out that on our team, we run at about 90 to 94% of our patients never have any injury at all. So, and that's about the norm for everything I see statistically, about 92%. And that's because we're just made very well. We're made to be pliant, and even in brutal rapes, I think the ones I see the worst injuries in are with a finger or a fingernail making a laceration or a cut, or some foreign object. But in sexual assault with the human body parts, it's less frequently that we see, it's almost non-existent to see really bad injuries. Usually we see the injuries with the fingernail or something else.
All right, thank you. What about when someone claims that they're raped because they regret having sex with someone? We sort of talked about that a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. But most of the statistics looking at false claims or false allegations of rape find that false allegations for sexual assault are the same as false allegations for any crime. So when you look at the people who falsely claim to have been robbed or burglarized or other crimes, it's about the same, and it's about 3%.
Thank you. This goes a little bit back to what you were speaking about. Do you have to have physical and visible bruises for there to be a solid case for rape?
You don't have to have those things. I mean, and Captain Carter, jump in on this as far as how you feel, but for the prosecution end of it, there's no easy way to define that because every case is so fact specific. Every case is going to be unique, and so what makes a solid case is going to vary case to case to case, but certainly those things help. Certainly those are tremendous evidence if those things are there, but like you just heard, they're so rarely there. It's so rare for us to have good visible or physical injuries or indicators that a sexual assault took place. But it all just depends. For me as a prosecutor, one of the most important things that I look at is what was the nature of the outcry? What was the nature of the first time the victim ever claimed she was sexually assaulted? Was it to a cop? Because if it was, I don't like that. Was it to her best friend? If it was, I really like that. Because if I want to get somebody in trouble, I'm going to talk to this guy right here. But if I'm telling you the truth and I'm upset about what happened to me, I'm going to talk to my best friend. And that's something that we can use. And so it just depends. Yes, the case is obviously stronger if we have those things, but there are a million other factors that can make a good case, even without good physical injuries. I mean, how do you feel about that, Lynn?
Yeah, you're right about that. There's going to be two sides to every case, you know, and we're going to try to corroborate what she says, and also, but what the suspect says, and he may say I was never there. Those are things we can prove.
Yes.
Or I was here, or I didn't go to the club or wherever, and we're going to look at what they say, look at what the suspect says, and we're going to try to come down and find out what really happened. So the injuries would help, but mainly just their clear memory of what happened. I'll tell you, it's difficult to do something if the victim can't remember. I mean, basically, these cases where the victim is drunk or high and if they can't tell us what happened, there's just no way it's going to go before a jury because we have to prove it. And if they can't prove it, the case is going to stop at the police department.
Well, injury, too, is not a sign always that there is forcible rape or forcible sex. There's no statistical, they're trying to do the statistical gathering all the time, but they've not found anything that really shows you a difference in consensual and non-consensual sex. And we have equipment that we use mostly on children, although our team uses it on every male really too that comes in, and it's binocular optics. And we're able to look very close, up to 15 times greater the size, and then document with a picture if we see an injury. So it could be a very minute injury, but we'll have an injury. Can we tell you that that was consensual or non-consensual? No, we don't. We just have to give the history they've given us as we got it and find trauma. So that's how we document it.
We have 2 questions along these lines, and before I actually get started, I wanted to introduce Dr. Linda Rubin. She's a little late, no problem. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Dr. Rubin. I'm a professor in the counseling psychology doctoral program here at Texas Women's University, and my areas of clinical research and teaching interest are in relational violence and traumatic stress. I apologize for being delayed.
Thank you for being here. Okay, we have 2 questions very similar. If someone is raped, how many years or months after can they wait to take legal action?
The statute of limitation is the amount of time that you can wait before any legal action can occur. It varies crime to crime. For most of our major crimes like sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, it's going to be 10 years. Okay, that can change some depending on the age of the victim. If the victim is under 18, that statute of limitations does not begin to run until their 18th birthday. The reason for that is very, very often, and in fact, frankly, in a majority of cases that I've seen, when there's sexual crimes taking place, it's being committed by a member of the family, dad, stepdad, mom's boyfriend, someone in the house is doing it. If you've got a kid who is in that situation, obviously they don't have a choice in where they live, they don't have a choice in who their family is, so they're not in a position where they can get away and report it. So the law has built in this mechanism so that once they're 18 and they're out on their own, that's when that statute of limitations begins to run. But that's the short answer, is 10 years for most of our sexual assault related crimes. Now that being said, if something is reported 5, 6, 8, 9 years down the road, am I going to be able to prove that case? That's going to be tough. And so that's a factor, but legally you can do it for that period of time. Oh, and also one other factor on this, if there was a sexual assault, and this is a fairly new law, if there was a sexual assault where a SANE nurse was brought in and biological evidence is recovered, and what that means is DNA. If we're able to recover DNA evidence of the attacker, if it's an unknown person, there's no statute of limitations. We can file on that person anytime once that person is identified. So.
I was just going to bring up too about we do have a rule for an exam, and that's 96 hours out from the assault. And the reason we've set it at 96 hours is that's a standard for Texas now. Not everybody uses it, but that is, they know that they can find, if there's a collection of it, if we've been able to collect it, there's the ability to find DNA evidence up to 96 hours. The talk is now it's going to move into the hundreds. It's going to be like 124 or something now. I don't know that we'll go to that, but it'll all be weighed. So that's where we set our standard, is if you were assaulted within those 96 hours, you can go to the police and talk with them, or go to the hospital and they'll call the police, because the police have to be involved. well, that's another whole issue. There is a non-reporting law now that you do not have to report to the police. And so we do abide by that as well. There are a lot of different things. If you don't want to report it to the police, you can go straight to the hospital, tell them it's a non-reported sexual assault. You do not want to have anything to do with the police at this point. And a nurse will be called in to do an exam. And we do all the evidentiary collection, do everything like we would if the police were standing outside our door. And then we take it, we mail it to the Department of Public Safety, and that kit or the evidence kit or rape kit, whatever you call it, will be held for at least 2 years from the time they receive it. It will never be opened. It can't have it can't have some of the things in it. It can't have liquids in it. It can't have clothes and things like that if we can get them in the box. But that's held. It is never opened unless the person who's asked for the exam goes to the police within that 2 years and says, I want to report this. And when they report a felony, then they will get the kit. They will ask the Department of Public Safety to go ahead and have that sent to the lab, and it becomes a case. One of the caveats to that is if you report it to the police and for whatever reason you decide, I don't want to do this.
Too late.
Don't want to do this.
Yep.
And then a couple of days later you think, okay, I'll not report it, but I'll go get an exam. We can't do the exam if you have talked with the police and started to report it, got a case started, and then chose not to. Or if you called them and kind of gotten the wheels rolling, we can't do a case in that way.
And kind of along those same lines, if a victim reports it to law enforcement takes it, puts the case together. At that point, really, it's out of the victim's hands. If at any point after that the victim decides, never mind, I don't want to press charges, I don't want to do this, it's kind of too late. If the police and the prosecutors, I'm getting attacked by a bug. If the police and the prosecutors feel like there's enough evidence to proceed, we proceed, even without a cooperative victim. And so that's something to consider.
I think one of the things, and I know statistics are really bad on non-reporting right now for Texas. We've just been doing it about 2 years. They will only destroy in 2 years if they're running out of space. They will go back and get the 2-year-old or more out, and they will be destroyed at that time. I don't think they offer them back. They will not give you your kit, or they will not open the kit unless there's been contact with you, and they won't give you a call and say, oh, by the way, your 2 years is up and we're getting ready to throw this out. So it's all put on to the survivor to make that decision before 2 years. They are completely anonymous. Also, I was going to say something else about the non-reporting cases. Just lost that. I'll think of that one in a minute. My daughter's back there thinking she's losing it.
All right. I once heard someone say it wasn't rape. How do you know your situation is bad enough for something to be done about it?
Well, again, I think that comes to there's going to be a different stance that Dr. Rubin and I would have than law enforcement would have. You know, my feeling is if you did not consent or were unable to consent, period, it's sexual assault, and you can always seek counseling and therapeutic help and support. I know that law enforcement has a different idea on that.
Well, if you believe you were raped, always report it. I mean, nobody at the police department's going to berate you or any. Those days in law enforcement are over. That's not acceptable. No one's going to sit there, and be skeptical of what you say. Report it. We're going to investigate it. That's our job. We may or may not be able to file a case on it, but if you feel like you've been raped or sexually assaulted, you should report it just like you would any other crime.
When I hear the term, it wasn't rape, that makes me think of the concept of date rape. And I have a bad reaction to the term date rape because it makes it sound like, it's sort of like rape light, like Coke Light or Pepsi Light, it's rape light. Like it's not really the real thing if you get raped while you're on a date. And we would never say that about something like a murder. We would never say, well, that's date murder.
We actually get some of those, by the way. Some neighbors.
And so the idea that it's not real rape, or that it's so-called date rape, and somehow that makes it lesser. I think that my point of view, again, is not a legal point of view, but is a psychological point of view, and that is that if you did not consent, then you were raped. Whether or not it can be proven in court is an entirely different matter.
All right. Can sexual assault be verbal or happen without touching the other person?
In children, it can. Legally. I mean, legally, for a child, I don't know if they would use the term sexual
There wouldn't
assault,
be
but it would be
sexual
sexual
assault.
abuse. Exposing a child to pornography or nudity, that's still considered child sexual abuse. I think as an adult, can it be damaging? Absolutely. Can it be emotionally harmful? Definitely. But I don't believe there's any laws that regulate.
No, from a criminal standpoint, whether you're talking about sexual assault or regular assault, it's virtually always, with very rare exceptions, like in the case of kids, it's almost always defined in terms of the physical injuries, physical pain. Like emotional pain doesn't count for an assault. It has to be physical. It can be really lame physical pain. I mean, I pulled Nicole's hair. Okay, that's an assault in Texas. But if I say really mean and nasty things to Nicole that hurt her on an emotional level, far worse than the hair pull, that's not an assault. It's just not legally. And so it's the same with sexual assault. It has to be. It's defined in terms of physical contact, physical penetration, things of that nature.
How can you tell if a male has been sexually assaulted by another male or female?
That's probably a Paula question.
Well, once again, you can't always tell if they have been. It's not, once again, the body's just made to withstand a lot of things and to be pliable. Sexual assault, with two males, or a woman can assault a male and it be sexual assault as well. So it goes back to their history for us, and then we go and look top to bottom everywhere they've seen or said that they were assaulted, and then just look at the whole body and put it all together. Many times we will see injuries that are just very, 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 very slight. Now, then you have to decide whether that was from the sexual assault or was it from something else. Was it, bowel movement or whatever. So it's kind of a gray zone. We listen very carefully to what the patient is telling us, because a lot of times that's the real story. I think too, who's going to come and have a sexual assault exam just for the fun of it on Saturday night? Not many people are. And so we feel like if they came, if they went through the police department, told their story, and then come to us seeking the care that they are going to get, then pretty much they have a sense that they've been sexually assaulted. Whether that's the case by law or not, I don't make that decision.
Men are so much less likely to report than women. Unfortunately, our society just has not been as supportive to male victims as I wish they were. I think it's so much harder because of gender roles and beliefs about how men are. Of the 130 or so sexual assault reports that we get that come through Friends of the Family and the SANES, about 1 or 2 of those a year is a male, adult male.
We've had more this year, I think.
Yeah, this year's been an anomaly. But
Yeah. They're getting more comfortable with it, or two, we offer medications to prevent STDs, and that we'd like everybody to know that, so that if that's what brings them into us, great, because we can make sure that they're getting the proper care and then get them off to the advocacy program or to someone for some counseling. So.
I just want to remind everybody really quickly, if you have a question or if something comes into your mind as we're talking here, please feel free to raise your hand. Someone will come by and give you a slip of paper that you can write your question down. Thank you. All right. We talked a little bit about false accusations of rape and how fairly rare they are. What are the consequences of someone falsely accusing another of sexual assault?
Well, if you make a false report to the police department, that's an offense in itself. It's a misdemeanor offense. It's difficult. It's as difficult to prove a false report as it would be. I mean, basically, there's not going to be any evidence if it's false.
Right.
And no, law enforcement isn't going to go out of its way to prove, to file a charge of false report against someone that files a sexual assault unless it's obvious. I mean, it would have to be blatant. It's not uncommon for us not to find evidence, so it would be extremely difficult to make a really good false report case unless they just came out and said, yeah, I lied on the person. We can say, yeah, this isn't a strong case, but a false report case, they're not easy to file. So.
No, the only time I've ever seen false report cases successful are when the victim says, I was assaulted or I was whatever the crime is, and it happened on Tuesday at 11:08 a.m. at this location, and this is who did it, and law enforcement goes out and finds affirmative evidence that person was somewhere else and it was physically impossible. Like there was actually, they just had a trial the other day where it wasn't a sexual assault, it was a theft. But this lady said, this guy stole from me, and here's when it happened and here's where it happened. And they went and talked to the suspect, and the suspect was like, dude, I was at Target with my friend at that time, and they went to Target and sure enough pulled the surveillance video, and there he was. He wasn't there, and ultimately the lady did come back and say, well, okay, I lied. But it would have to be something like that, otherwise you could never prove it ever. So
we're more inclined to seek some kind of counseling for someone that would go through, because it's a pretty exhaustive process to file a sexual assault report, and we would be more inclined to seek counseling or something for someone who would go through that trouble. I mean, usually there's other issues involved that would be more important than filing a misdemeanor case against somebody. Now, if they put the suspect through quite a bit and there are many opportunities to, recant, we might be more inclined to file if the suspect, because the suspect, he goes through a lot also if it turns out to be a false report. But generally in those cases we'll find underlying mental problems or some sort of psychological or emotional issues involved, so it's rare to file.
All right. What is the primary age range for victims and perpetrators of adult sexual assault?
The highest risk time period is late adolescence and young adulthood. So that highest risk time is going to be around 17 up through about 23. Freshman year of college is probably the highest risk time period for sexual assault.
Perpetrators?
Oh, perpetrators? That I don't. That's hard to answer because the problem is most perpetrators, sex offenders, admit starting in adolescence, but they continue until stopped. So saying the typical age range it just depends on when they got caught and stopped. But most sex offenders will say that they started during adolescence, start offending in some way, though it might have started with peeping or some other form.
And there's a follow-up. What might be the long-term effects of sexual assault on people of that age group, so college students?
College students, there are long-term effects, but what I've also seen is huge success with therapy. So in working with survivors, I've seen survivors go on, work through it and be successful and move on, but it does have a lasting impact, and sometimes people aren't ready to seek help right away. And we've had people come 11, 15, 20, 30 years later is when they finally come and seek help.
The kinds of problems that tend to present themselves are, you could think about them in a couple of categories. One is those diagnosable conditions when somebody has, let's say, a disorder like post-traumatic stress disorder. Rape is a clear and identifiable trauma that a person experiences that can be overwhelming and devastating, and that can have long-term psychological consequences for the person who's experiencing that. So we have diagnosable conditions like PTSD or depression, and then you have other kinds of consequences where people's lives are impacted, but it's not necessarily a diagnosable state. For example, if somebody is raped by a person who they know, then they will also often develop problems trusting their own judgment of who they select to be a friend, or trusting other people to have their best interests at heart. Folks will sometimes have if they're already in a significant sustained relationship, there may be problems that develop within that relationship, including problems of a sexual nature, because someone may not want to be touched, or someone may not want to engage in sexual activity after having experienced something traumatic.
Thank you. Next question. If she had an orgasm during the assault, does this harm her chances of prosecution?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, you agree with that, Lynn? Yes, because a jury would see it that way. I mean, that's. I'm not saying that would bar us from prosecuting the case, but absolutely that would be. Well, I'll tell you a true story. One of my friends, whose office is right next door to mine, had a sexual assault case one time, and it was a age difference case where you had like a 16-year-old girl and like a 20-year-old guy, and her father was of the belief that she was forcibly raped against her will, held down and raped, and the prosecutor on the case made an offer. It was probation. Dad got really, really mad. And I hear my friend next door on the phone just with this guy just giving it to her, yelling at her about offering this guy probation, and she's not able to get a word in edgewise, and finally she kind of snaps and says, "Sir, it's pretty hard to be raped when you're on top." And that put a very quick end to that conversation, because that's a big factual thing that a jury is going to look at. And yes, that would be bad evidence for us. It wouldn't necessarily bar prosecution. Again, there's too many variables, too many facts that would come into play, but certainly that could be a problem. So
Keep in mind that what makes for a legal case and what means rape occurred are two very different things.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the human body responds. It responds to stimuli whether you want it to or not. If someone blows in your face, you'll blink. You can try as hard as you want to not to, but you're going to blink. It's just our body physiologically responds to stimuli, and so it's not an indication of consent. And
that right there is why I've never seen that come up in a case, but if that were to happen, obviously, as when we're prosecuting a case, you go into a case and you have good facts and bad facts. You have facts that are really good for your case and facts that are bad for your case. And if you have facts that are bad for your case, you have to account for those. You can't just sit there and go, "Oh man, the defense attorney is going to hit me really hard on this one." You got to be proactive and deal with those things. And so, if I was prosecuting a sexual assault case and I knew that my victim had had an orgasm and that was going to come in, the first phone call I'm making is right here, because she's my expert witness, and I've done this before with her, and she's phenomenal. But I'm putting her on the stand to testify as an expert in her field to exactly what she just said, to account for that bad fact, to give the jury something to go, okay, that fact is maybe inconsistent in my mind with what a sexual assault should be, but they explain why. And so you would have to do something like that to account for that in your case. So.
I would just like to to follow up with one sentence to what Dr. Holmes said, and that is that having an orgasm does not constitute consent.
Right.
Again, and I'll probably have to say this for every response, irrespective of what the law can do about it, orgasm doesn't constitute consent.
And I think that goes clear to the male on males, or
Oh,
the male
absolutely, yeah.
who's been sexually assaulted. Men can be sexually assaulted by females, and it is a normal physiological action for them. So I'd like to be around when you try that one too.
Yeah, yeah.
Paula wants to be on the stand too.
So I'd just like to be able to watch.
All right. How long does it take to process a sexual assault case? About how long is a sexual assault trial?
You want to do the first part of that?
Yeah, to process a case, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it depends on the facts of that case. If it's just a straightforward he said, she said, and it's going to take however long it takes to send off. If it happened on a bed or something, we've got to send those sheets off for process. You're looking at 3 months before we're going to begin to get any evidence back, possibly. It just depends on the fact. It's hard to say, really. If it's a pretty straightforward case, we may be able to investigate it in a few weeks. But most of the time, it's going to be his word versus her word, and we're going to be looking at lab evidence and other things. So it's going to take some time. 6 weeks is a short amount of time. It
Really
can take
quick.
much longer than that.
And in terms of once the case gets from the police to the courthouse, it's absolutely the opposite of what you see on TV, where a crime happens Friday night, Monday morning you're in court. You're in trial. It doesn't work that way. It's a slow process. It's designed to be a slow process because there are certain procedural things that have to happen to make sure everybody's rights are protected. But on average, for a felony case, from the time we first get the case from law enforcement all the way through a jury trial, which would be a very small percentage of cases make it that far. Most of them result in a guilty plea before you get there. But say it goes all the way through the trial, you're looking at probably at least a year, sometimes as much as 2 years, sometimes even more, depending. And again, there's a lot of reasons why. One of the biggest ones in sex crimes is what Captain Carter talked about, and that's we have to wait on the lab. Contrary to what you see on CSI, DNA analysis takes a long time, and it's expensive. If you go through, a lot of agencies use the DPS crime lab, which there's one in Garland, there's one in Austin. I think going through DPS right now for DNA, the wait is something like 9 months. It's approaching a year to get DNA results back. There are other labs. Actually, the University of North Texas has a really good DNA lab. It's located in downtown Fort Worth, and we've been using them a lot more lately, I think, to their chagrin. We're starting to overwhelm them a little bit. But I've gotten DNA results back from them in like 4 weeks, which is incredibly fast for that type of analysis. But it takes a while, and it's a slow process. So from crime to trial, a year is pretty quick.
All right. What are some of the reasons sex offenders say they started?
Well, and actually, it was an interesting recent study I read, but most commonly what you'll hear sex offenders claim is that they were sexually abused themselves as a child. A more recent study actually found that when they asked sex offenders, they said, yes, I was sexually abused as a child. When they then told them they were going to hook them up to a polygraph, they immediately changed their mind and said, no, I wasn't sexually abused as a child. And so the percentage decreased by more than half who said sexual abuse when they believed they were going to be hooked up to a polygraph. So at least that study, and it was about, I think it was like 1,200 men. It was a pretty big study they did out of a sex offender clinic was somewhere up north. I don't remember where. So that is not the case. Also keep in mind the offenders that get caught and interviewed are different than the offenders who never get caught. So what we know from the research is from those who've been caught.
When we catch someone that we actually end up filing a case on, and they answer those questions, it's generally they do it because they can. I mean, because they thought they could get away with, and they wanted to do it, and they were bigger and strong enough to do it. It's really it was about they had power, they thought, over that victim.
They're extremely arrogant.
Yeah,
Very arrogant.
And so there's no, they don't blame that they were a victim or something. It's generally, I wanted to do that and I did it. I'm sorry. They may say they're sorry, but they did it at that moment because they could do it, and that's generally why.
Many sex offenders will report that they started out with fantasies of rape and sexual assault of various sorts, and over time, as they masturbate to these fantasies, and the fantasies after a while they don't work as well, and so you will have some sex offenders who will report that they move on to real life kinds of scenarios when the fantasies don't work.
All right. What if you were raped by law enforcement or higher authority? What legal action should be taken?
Well, if you're raped by law enforcement, I certainly can understand the reluctance to go report it to law enforcement, but that would be the most important thing that you could do. Is if it happened, for instance, in your city, take it to another city, but make that report as soon as possible, because if you have somebody in law enforcement accused of that, I mean, that's extremely serious, and that person has a lot of power and opportunity to, commit more assaults if it's somebody in law enforcement. So, even though that would be difficult, report it somehow, somewhere, just like you would any other sexual assault.
And in terms of the crime, let's say take sexual assault for example, that's still the same as legally. It's the same as any other sexual assault in terms of what crime is being committed. There are some other crimes that come into play, though. The one that jumped to my mind is official oppression, which is where a police officer or a person in a position of authority uses that power to harm or victimize another person. That's a separate crime called official oppression, and you could actually be charged with both of those things: sexual assault and official oppression. And so, absolutely, it needs to be reported. And again, I thought that was good advice. If it's in one agency, maybe take it to another police agency. If it's a city PD, take it to the sheriff's office or call the Texas Rangers or whatever. But absolutely, it's got to be reported.
And we've done that. It was domestic violence, but we had a case where it was a police officer in a smaller town in Denton County. We took it to Denton County Sheriff's Department. They took it very seriously and went forward with the case.
Well, and that's one thing I think, and you can speak to this better than I can, Lynn, but in my experience, nobody wants to go after cops that are doing stuff like that more than cops. I mean, is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you hear about the thin blue line and that cops protect each other, but cops vigorously pursue other cops that make us look bad. It's almost embarrassing sometimes how unforgiving police officers are of each other whenever they cross that line. I think we're the first ones to pretty much think, well, they're guilty before they've been proven. There was a case recently in, I think it was Garland.
Oh, yeah.
A guy was pulled over for DWI, and it turned out he was a diabetic or something. He was an officer on duty. They had him in jail that morning in his uniform. And it turned out that he was a diabetic or something. But that police, contrary to what you see on TV, in most cases, are very adamant about pursuing other officers that go over the lines.
I've had a couple of occasions in my career to actually prosecute police officers, and I was shocked the first time at the response I got from other law enforcement. They were like, "You need to kill this guy," and I was like, "Whoa!" I was expecting something different from y'all, and it was the exact opposite of what I expected going in, because I did kind of expect a thin blue line. I expected some resistance, and it was the exact opposite of that. So.
All right. Is it a crime if a father makes his daughter touch his sexual organ without any physical force?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It is.
What are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and do all survivors experience them?
I don't know if Linda or I should take either one.
Well, why don't I start and then you can follow up. There, as it is currently identified, post-traumatic stress disorder has 4 elements to it. One is that there has to be some kind of trauma. Of course, that's what we're all up here talking about. And somebody has to be overwhelmed, emotionally overwhelmed in some way by that trauma. The second element is that the person who's traumatized would re-experience in some form the trauma. So it's when something overwhelming happens, it may have happened to many of you, not necessarily a sexual assault, but something traumatic, and it's hard to get it out of your mind. You think about it over and over again, might have dreams or nightmares about it. So to relive it in some form. So that would be the second element. The third element would be avoidance, and that's trying to get away from those images. So trying any kind of behavior, any kind of activity you can imagine to get away from that emotionally overwhelmed feeling. So what you get is this pendulum effect where somebody is feeling overwhelmed, they're having these intrusive thoughts that they can't get rid of no matter how much they try. And they try to push it out of their awareness. So this is the avoidance part. I don't want to think about it, I don't want to look at it. And then it breaks through, because this takes a lot of work not to think about it, not to look at it for long periods of time, and it breaks through, and then someone has intrusive images, nightmares, they try to push it out of awareness, so you get this pendulum effect going back and forth between re-experiencing and avoidance. And the final element of post-traumatic stress disorder is hyperarousal, which involves a number of features associated with anxiety. People have trouble sleeping, people have trouble concentrating, people have trouble getting their work done. As you might imagine, as you have this whole pendulum effect going on, it's hard for someone to go on with the ordinary activities of day-to-day life. So those are the 4 primary elements of PTSD.
I mean, one thing I would add that it has to have been 6 months since the trauma for PTSD. Otherwise, it's acute stress disorder, but really the symptomologies and experiencing is similar. We expect that there's going to be some changes in the new DSM whenever it comes out, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, has suggested they're going to take a developmental approach. And what that means is that we know that when the trauma occurs in your life can make a difference in what it looks like. And when a trauma occurs during childhood, especially in a reoccurring trauma like sexual abuse within the home, that it looks a little different than that. That we may not see the classic kind of PTSD picture, but we might see more issues of difficulty in having trust relationships, feeling very emotionally reactive, having a lot of chaotic relationships. So it can look a little different than when you experience a sexual assault or another trauma in adulthood. So that isn't a recognized difference in the disorder yet, but we expect it may be. They're saying that that's going to be the case in the next DSM. We'll find out.
All right. Is it common for the same person to be sexually assaulted throughout his or her life or more than once?
Yes. There's a lot of research that does show that there is a re-victimization is common, especially when sexual assault occurs in childhood. And just as I was saying, that developmental approach, it impacts you on so many levels when someone is sexually abused in a child. And it impacts how you interact with other people, your trust, your self-esteem. And so there has been research showing that you are at greater risk for future victimizations, whether that's future sexual assaults or domestic violence.
From a law enforcement point of view, if you're saying an adult that's out there that is reporting multiple sexual assaults, there is at some point going to be, we're going to put more scrutiny on what you say. If you're, and we have some cases now where the same victim or survivor has said that they've been raped on multiple occasions. At some point, we do put more scrutiny on them because it's not very good for their case, and then unfortunately, we have to prove what they say, and that's something that's going to come up if you're constantly, you know, claiming that you've been sexually assaulted. We're going to have to put together a very good case in order to pursue it. So we may take longer to investigate your case and actually put a little bit more scrutiny on your case, because it's uncommon for an adult to go out and be raped, more than once by a stranger or whatever. And we do have some cases like that here in this town where the same victim has reported numerous sexual assaults, after going to a bar or something like that. That case is going to be a very difficult case for us to give to the prosecutor.
Now, that being said, because I completely agree with that, if you're confining it to sexual assault claims by an adult, if you're talking about domestic violence, we see that all the time. I mean, and that I think is where it really comes up, is maybe you were sexually assaulted as a child, and then as an adult, you see the same victims, and I've spent a lot of time as a domestic violence prosecutor, and it's really kind of sad. You see the same victims over and over and over again, oftentimes with the same perpetrator, oftentimes with different perpetrators. I've had, the same victim get abused by different boyfriends or different husbands, because they do tend to gravitate towards those abusive relationships. And I mean, y'all are better qualified than me to speak to that, but it seems to me that's a logical connection between something that happened to them in their earlier life and the relationships that they find themselves in as an adult.
There are also some high-risk groups that are more likely to be re-victimized. Disabled adults, mentally disabled particularly, are at high risk, and so we have had a few cases where we will see the same victim again. We had I want to say she was 18. She was mildly mentally retarded, and she had had more than one sexual assault that had gone through having a SANE exam, but they're just a high-risk group. Predators prey on those who cannot protect themselves, unfortunately.
All right. Does the age of a victim have anything to do with the harshness of the consequence, and why? Yes,
it does. If the way sexual assault is defined in Texas, I said earlier, 17 is the magic number. If you're 17 years old, you're an adult for sexual purposes, you're an adult for criminal law purposes. If you're 17, you're going to be treated as an adult in the criminal justice system. And so if you have a sexual assault victim from the age of 14 to 17, that's going to be it was either a forcible rape situation, or the older person was more than 3 years older. That's going to be called sexual assault. That's a second-degree felony. The range is 2 years to 20 years in prison. You can also get probation of up to 10 years in length. If the victim of a sexual assault is under the age of 14, that's called an aggravated sexual assault. That's a first-degree felony, and the range is 5 years to life. And so 14 is that magic number. Even if it's otherwise consensual, for lack of a better word, if you have a 13-year-old kid who is even initiating sex with an older person, the fact that that younger person is under the age of 14, it is automatic. It's an aggravated sexual assault, and that's a first-degree felony. It's the same level offense as murder. Actually, murder is a first-degree felony, 5 to life. Same with aggravated sexual assault.
If an individual is gang raped with the use of condoms, is there still enough physical evidence to prosecute all of the attackers?
Yes. Even if you don't have DNA evidence, well, you can still get DNA evidence if they have a condom. But let's say you don't. I mean, it comes down, I've said it before, to you're going to get two stories. We're going to need to know where it happened. People generally, if they tell us that a gang rape happened, we're going to go to the scene of that crime and look at it. If they know the scene, we'll look at it. We're going to talk to the suspect and find out who all was involved. When there's multiple people accused of a crime, it's actually easier to find out if the stories are consistent. Yep. Because we're going to play the people against each other and find out what happened. So it's much easier with multiple offenders than it would be with just the two, he said and she said. Somebody is going to slip up, and the case is going to be easier to investigate. So
someone almost always talks. And that's always been my experience. If you have multiple offenders, it's not that difficult to divide and conquer. And somebody is going to crack. And when that happens, that makes the case much easier to prove. So,
Are sexual assault crime rates going up or down, and why?
Locally, they're going down. It's crime in general is going down, locally and nationally. But what we're finding more here locally is that the actual sexual assaults that we end up filing have pretty much stayed consistent. The types of report have been about the same, generally the same. We get a lot here in Denton. We get a lot of date rape type cases. I know you don't like the term, but these cases where the victim and the offender knew each other, and there's some kind of intoxicant involved or something like that. That's stayed pretty consistent. That's actually started to go down because of you guys are becoming more aware of the dangers of going out and drinking and being put in a vulnerable situation. And on the other side, men are beginning to learn that, hey, you have responsibility when it comes to sex also. You can't, if someone's too drunk to give you consent, they're beginning to get the idea that you don't continue forward and that you bear responsibility if you do so. So as you guys get more aware of it, it should continue to go down as far as the numbers.
Is gang rape, in gang rape, will one suspect be charged more harshly than the other?
Again, how's this for a lawyer answer? It depends. It depends. Again, every case is incredibly fact specific, and it just depends on the facts of that particular case. What we were just talking about a minute ago with the concept of divide and conquer, if you have multiple suspects, oftentimes you're going to, as a prosecutor, not always, but very often, I'm going to need at least one of them. And usually I only need one. I don't really want to have more than one. But in terms of what people are charged with, gang rape is an interesting scenario because a minute ago when we were talking about victims under the age of 14, that's aggravated sexual assault, first-degree felony. Well, if you have a sexual assault with more than one perpetrator, that's also aggravated sexual assault. That's one of the ways. There are many ways that a sexual assault can become aggravated sexual assault, and one of them is if you have more than one offender. And so if you have that situation where you've got 2 or 3 guys that commit an offense, and one of them cracks and one of them is now going to cooperate, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that that person is going to end up getting a better deal in order to get all of them. I mean, now, what you see on TV where you have like 3 guys and okay, the first one that talks gets a walk. That doesn't happen. But it might be one of them gets to plea his case to a sexual assault, which is a second-degree felony, as opposed to an aggravated sexual assault, which is a first-degree felony. So in terms of what they're charged with, everybody will probably be charged the same way. In terms of where their cases end up, depending on their level of cooperation, you could see a discrepancy there. So, and it also depends on who did what. If if you have 3 guys, one of them held the victim down while the other one actually engaged in intercourse with the victim, while the third guy kind of watched the door to make sure nobody came in. As a prosecutor, the one that I want to flip is the good eye. I want to go after the guy watching the door, and see if I can get him to cooperate, because he is, while they're all culpable, he's probably the least culpable of the 3. And the way the law works in Texas is we don't have something called an accessory. You see that word on Law and Order sometimes, that he was an accessory to murder, he was an accessory to the robbery. We don't have that in Texas. Every single person who helps or encourages or even attempts to aid in the commission of a crime is guilty of the same crime. Even if you didn't pull the trigger, if you If it was a robbery that went bad, that a clerk at the 7-Eleven got killed and you were the getaway driver and never went into the store, you're still guilty of capital murder if we can prove that that was kind of part of the plan, even though you never touched the gun. Same thing with sexual crimes. And so it just depends on who did what and what the evidence is in the case.
We only have a couple more questions. If you guys think of anything, please raise your hand and we'll grab it right at the end here. How can you help a friend who has been sexually assaulted?
I think there's a lot of ways that you can be helpful in that process. And one is keeping in mind, like we said, if it's within 96 hours, that they can still get a sexual assault exam. And that's beneficial for numerous reasons. I mean, not only is it because, then you have the case can go forward and they're going to have a better case, but also it helps the survivor know that they're okay, they're intact, there aren't any internal injuries. They can get treatment for possible STDs. They can just get looked over to make sure they're okay. So in that sense, if it's been within 96 hours, letting them know that they have that right to do that and, offer to go with them to the hospital to help them through that process. If it's been past the time of when an exam can be done, being there and just listening. Don't ask them questions about why it happened or why didn't you do this. Just pretend you don't know the word why. Drop that out of your vocabulary. Be supportive, believe them, and tell them it's not their fault. Those are some of the most important things you can do, and encourage them to seek professional counseling. And Friends of the Family, all of our services are free, so they can come to us. But also, if they're here on campus, we have Project Rev, and so they have a counselor here on campus devoted specifically to this, to be there and help them through the process.
Can I just say something about the cost? For a sexual assault exam, if it is, for us to do it, for the team to do a sexual assault exam, it must be reported to police. And part of that is that it is the police department that pays for the exam, a sexual assault exam, and then they are reimbursed through crime victims' compensation through the state. There are bills that would go to a patient if it's, say, the medications that we give. That's not covered under the sexual assault exam. And so you would receive a bill, but you can pay it and then file that either with your insurance or they'll file it with your insurance, or they will, you can pay it and then send all of your bills into crime victims' compensation, and they will help reimburse you.
Can you talk a little bit, what's crime victims compensation?
Crime victims' compensation is a fund that's been set up in, I guess, all states now, but I know in this state it's set up, is through the Office of the Attorney General, and it is set up for all sorts of victims of crime, not just sexual assault. We do have a portion of that, but it is not the government's money. It is not taxes. It is what we're paying when we run a light or when we're speeding. It is ticket money, and it comes out of a fund that is from all of us who constantly drive too fast or use our car in a school zone. Or there are portions of that that go to crime victims' compensation.
And they have a lot of money.
And
They have a lot of money.
And oddly enough, there's very little of it.
Yep.
They're saying that a very small portion of it is going out on the sexual assault exam itself. That they're obviously not being billed enough for that. So we'll try and help them.
And even if it's a case of domestic violence, crime victims' compensation is still there, but you must have a police report or a protective order in order to qualify. You do not have to be a legal citizen. You do not have to, it is available. You just have to have reported it or gotten a protective order. And you have to cooperate with law enforcement. So if it's a domestic violence case, she reports it, and then she decides not to cooperate with the district attorney's office when they pursue the case, that could be a reason that they could be disqualified. But otherwise, Friends of the Family or a police department, they can help you file for crime victims' compensation if you qualify for it.
All right, our last question this evening. What precautions can a person, whether male or female, take to keep themselves safe and lower the chances of being sexually assaulted?
I'm always careful with this question because what I don't want to suggest that it's ever the victim's fault. And so what happens when we talk about prevention is survivors start to question themselves as to what did I do or what didn't I do. Putting that aside, remember that most of the time, 9 out of 10 cases of sexual assault, it's somebody the victim knew. So this idea of it being someone in the dark parking lot that grabs you is not the norm. That is fairly rare. So all those things that you hear about that you're supposed to do, looking under your car, or you hear all these warnings that are in Cosmo or put out on the internet, they're really not terribly helpful because most of the time it's somebody you trust and that you know. Some things, especially on a college campus, to be careful of is drinking, and be very aware of your drink. Date rape drugs are used quite a bit in Denton County. I've had a lot of clients come through. In teaching at both universities, I've had a lot of students tell me about being drugged, and I've even heard of bartenders being paid to drop the drugs into drinks. So be very aware if you're drinking. Watch your drink. If you leave your drink to go to the bathroom, pretend it no longer existed. It's gone. I know that's an expensive $8 trip to the bathroom, but it's better than the alternative. So, just using a buddy system is really helpful. If you decide to go to the bars drinking, be with a group of friends. If one person gets drunk too fast, that's a red flag, because that's what date rape drugs look like, usually, is being overly intoxicated. So if someone's had one drink and they look too drunk, get them out of there. So use your buddy system, be there to support each other. I don't know, do you have other suggestions, Dr. Rippon?
The research suggests that self-defense, fighting back, will sometimes offer a kind of buffer, and that the women who fight back are not any more likely to sustain severe injury than those who don't fight back. So I would say don't put yourself in what you would consider to be any additional risk, but the research would support fighting back.
I just wanted to say something from the medical side on date rape drugs. Most often what we hear is absolutely no memory of what happened to them until they wake up and they've been sexually assaulted. Our problem with defining what was a date rape drug is that it is out of your system the first time you go to the bathroom. So it is a very rapid half-life, and it's not traceable many, many times. It takes special testing to do it. But we try and always make sure that we get the first urine, if at all possible, if we think that, or if the patient thinks that they have ingested a drug, that they don't have any memory of what's happening, and just have kind of that same scenario of that. The other part I would just throw out, just kind of in closing, is about strangulation. I don't know if it's my imagination because there's so much out there for us as medical people, but we're probably seeing more strangulation than we are finding out about from the patient. It is a very rapid thing. It can be just the very minimal pressure on the neck, and you can be passed out and then wake up almost instantly, and you will not remember or not know what happened in that time frame. You won't recognize it as having been strangled. But there are some things 8 to 24 hours later that can be happening, which is the swelling around in your throat, hoarseness. Those are sort of things that you need to say, oh, my throat's scratchy, I sound a little hoarse. Well, that's a red flag to us, and we want to really be aware of it. We always look at throats and always talk to people about possible strangulation because there's more of that going on. The other thing that I hesitate to even bring it up if you haven't heard about it, but I have a feeling every one of y'all have, is what's called the choking game. And it is a game that's being played by a lot of people. And it's a very, very dangerous game. And it is either being choked or choking yourself. to the point of unconsciousness. So just be aware of it, don't participate in it, but also watch your friends and make sure that that there are people around that can help them if that's going on. So a lot of choking and sexual assault as well.
You mentioned the buddy system, and that's what I see come across my desk with sexual assault cases is when you go out with your friends, don't leave your friend there at the bar, or don't let your friend go home if they're intoxicated with somebody who they don't know and they're not acting the way you know them to act. I see that a lot where they were out as a group and everyone allowed this friend to stay there by themselves, or they allowed this guy to take them home. If you go there together, if you don't know everybody involved, come back together. Another thing is with the social networking and all that, a lot of young college students you have this relationship over the computer, and then you decide to allow that person to come to your apartment or your home, and you don't really know that person. Sometimes they're not who they say they are. We see an increasing number of cases where they met the person online, and then they came to spend the weekend with them, and they were sexually assaulted or something like that. So watch out for your friends, and then do your best to know the people that you're dealing with.
If I might add one other thought, in relation to what you were saying, Nicole, about not wanting to be careful about how to answer this question and not wanting to blame the victim, because the victims, of course, are not responsible for being assaulted. I would add that the extent to which we can get men in the culture to talk to one another and confront one another about these kinds of violent behaviors that are being perpetrated against women, the extent to that we can get men to participate in this sort of thing, I think can make a big difference. Women talking out about this for 30 years have not changed the rates of rape or domestic violence. So we need to take another kind of approach. And one of the approaches currently being advocated is to not see this just as a women's issue or a women's problem, but this is everybody's problem. If any man here knows, loves, cares about one other woman, your mother, your sister, then it's your problem too. And so the extent to which we can get men on board trying to fight this, I think would be to the good.
Thank you all so much. Before we end, I just wanted to let you guys know that there are a lot of resources available here at TWU and in our community. If you or someone you know is a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence or stalking, Project Rev is available, as I said. We offer advocacy resources, counseling services, and of course Friends of the Family has a wide range of services they can provide as well. We have some information about that available in the back with our beautiful student organization officers back there. So if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to stick around and chat up. I'm offering y'all's services and chat up our panelists a little bit. And also, as I said, we're also available all the time, Project Rev. If you have any questions or just want to speak to someone one-on-one, we're always available for that. So let's give a big round of applause